The intersection of profound grief and unexpected grace creates moments that transcend the boundaries of entertainment programming. Moments when a simple game show answer becomes a vehicle for expressing loss that has been carried in silence for years. And moments when the precision of language meets the depth of human emotion to produce responses that honor both the question asked and the deeper truth that must be spoken. These instances remind us that children who have lost parents to war carry burdens that shape their entire development, that the process of growing up without a father or mother who died in service becomes woven into every aspect of identity formation, and that sometimes the most powerful tributes emerge not from prepared speeches, but from spontaneous answers that reveal how completely military sacrifice has been integrated into a young person's understanding of life and love. Recognition of the lifelong impact on children who lose parents to military service. Acknowledgement of the particular challenges faced by these Gold Star children as they mature without the parent who should have been present. And commitment to supporting their emotional and practical needs across their entire developmental trajectory should inform how society honors and assists families who have paid the ultimate price for national security. The Patterson family appeared on the Family Feud stage during Veterans Week with a composition that immediately signaled their Gold Star family status to anyone familiar with military loss. 12-year-old Connor Patterson stood as the youngest competitor alongside his mother, Jennifer, his maternal grandmother, his uncle, and a family friend who had served with Connor's father before his death. The absence of Connor's father was both invisible and overwhelming, present in the carefully maintained composure of the adults surrounding the boy, and in the particular quality of protective attention they directed toward him throughout the pre-game proceedings. Steve Harvey conducted standard interviews with warmth and respect, thanking Jennifer for her husband's service and acknowledging the sacrifice their family had made without dwelling on details that would be discussed if and when the family chose to share them. The game proceeded through several rounds with both families demonstrating solid knowledge and competitive spirit. Connor participated actively despite being the youngest contestant on either team, providing thoughtful answers and showing composure that seemed remarkable for his age. Steve interacted with him naturally, neither patronizing him due to his youth nor overlooking him in favor of adult contestants. The dynamic between Connor and his family members revealed the careful scaffolding they had constructed around him, the ways they supported him while allowing him independence, the balance between protection and empowerment that characterizes healthy family systems managing significant loss. The pivotal moment arrived during the fourth round when the Patterson family needed 48 points to advance to the final round. Steve read the survey question that would become the catalyst for profound emotional expression disguised as game show participation. The question asked contestants to name something people do to honor someone they love who has passed away. The phrasing was broad enough to elicit various conventional responses while also creating space for answers that carried deeper personal significance. Connor's mother, Jennifer, won the face-off with the response, "Visit their grave," which appeared as the number 3 answer worth 18 points. The family chose to play rather than pass to the opposing team. The grandmother took her turn and offered, "Share stories about them," which registered as the number 2 answer with 26 points. The uncle contributed, "Donate to charity in their name," which was the number 5 answer worth 12 points. The family friend suggested, "Celebrate their birthday," which was not on the board and resulted in their first strike. The rotation brought the turn back to Jennifer, who proposed, "Keep their photographs displayed," which was not on the board and gave the family their second strike. The pressure increased as they stood one incorrect answer away from allowing the opposing team an opportunity to steal. The turn passed to Connor, 12 years old, and facing a moment that would have challenged adults under far less emotionally weighted circumstances. Connor stood at the podium looking at his mother, at his grandmother, at the adults who had helped raise him in the absence of his father. Steve approached him with gentle encouragement appropriate for a young contestant under pressure, asking what Connor thought people did to honor loved ones who had passed away. The boy's response came after a pause during which he visibly gathered himself, a moment of internal preparation that suggested he understood he was about to say something significant. His voice when he spoke was clear despite obvious emotion, the words carefully chosen and delivered with conviction that belied his youth. Connor stated that people honor those they love who have passed away by becoming the person that loved one believed they could be, by living their lives in ways that would make their deceased loved one proud. by choosing their actions based on what their lost family member would have wanted for them, and by carrying forward the values and dreams their loved one held for their future. The answer was not a simple 3 or 4 word phrase like the other responses, but rather a complete articulation of a philosophy Connor had clearly developed through years of processing his father's absence and determining how to honor that loss through his own growth and choices. The studio audience responded immediately with applause that began before Steve could check whether the answer appeared on the board. The emotional resonance of Connor's response, the maturity it demonstrated, and the obvious personal significance it carried created a moment that transcended the game show context. Steve Harvey stood motionless at the podium, his face showing the progression of responses as he processed what Connor had said. Recognition of the depth beneath the surface answer, understanding that this 12-year-old had just articulated a grief philosophy most adults never develop, and awareness that Connor was speaking from direct experience of loss, rather than from abstract consideration of the question, combined to produce visible emotional impact. Steve's eyes filled with tears that he did not attempt to hide or minimize. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face, making no effort to maintain his typical entertaining persona or to deflect from the genuine emotional response Connor's answer had evoked. The board revealed that Connor's answer corresponded to the number 1 response, phrased in the survey as "live the way they would want you to," and worth 32 points. The Patterson family had secured the points needed to advance to the final round, but this technical outcome had become secondary to the emotional significance of the moment. Steve approached Connor with visible emotion, kneeling to bring himself to eye level with the boy. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of its usual performance quality, instead reflecting authentic engagement with a young person who had just demonstrated extraordinary emotional intelligence and courage. Steve asked Connor to tell him about his father, to share who he was honoring when he gave that answer. The request was gentle and offered Connor full agency to decline or to share whatever he felt comfortable sharing, but it also created space for Connor to speak about his loss publicly if he chose to do so. Connor's composure held as he began speaking about his father, Marine Corps Captain David Patterson, who had been killed in action in Afghanistan in 2016 when Connor was 6 years old. He described his father as someone who had believed deeply in service, who had talked to Connor even at his young age about the importance of becoming the best version of himself, who had told him that the measure of a person was found in their choices and their character rather than in their circumstances or their achievements. Connor explained that his father had been killed during an operation that saved other Marines who were under attack, that his father had chosen to expose himself to danger in order to protect others, and that this choice represented the values his father had lived by and had hoped Connor would embody. The boy continued by explaining how his father's death had initially made him angry rather than sad, how he had struggled for years with feeling abandoned, even though he understood intellectually that his father had not chosen to die, but had died while doing his duty. Connor described the therapeutic work he had done to process his grief, the support he had received from his mother and extended family, and the gradual evolution of his understanding from feeling abandoned to feeling honored that his father had believed Connor could grow into someone strong and good, even without his father present to guide him. He spoke about making decisions by asking himself what his father would want him to do, about choosing to work hard in school because his father had valued education, about treating others with respect because his father had modeled integrity and kindness, about becoming involved in activities that built character because his father had believed character was the foundation of a meaningful life. Jennifer, Connor's mother, stepped forward to provide additional context. She explained that Connor had been 6 years old when David was killed, old enough to have formed significant memories and attachment, but young enough that much of what he knew about his father came from stories told by family members rather than from his own direct experience. She described the challenge of helping Connor maintain connection to a father he had only partly known, of sharing stories that kept David's presence alive in their home, while also acknowledging the painful reality of his absence. She spoke about Connor's determination to understand his father not as an abstract hero, but as a real person with strengths and flaws, with dreams and fears, with a genuine relationship to Connor that had been cut short, but that remained meaningful and formative. Jennifer described how Connor had asked her repeatedly in the years following David's death what his father would have wanted for him, how he had sought guidance from a parent who could no longer provide it directly. She had responded by sharing David's values, his hopes for Connor's future, his belief that Connor had the potential to become someone who made positive impact on others and who lived with integrity and purpose. These conversations had apparently shaped Connor's internal framework for decision-making and self-evaluation, creating an ongoing relationship with his father that existed through Connor's choices and growth rather than through direct interaction. The grandmother contributed her perspective on watching Connor process his grief and develop his understanding of how to honor his father's memory. She described observing Connor at David's funeral at age 6, too young to fully comprehend the finality of death, but clearly aware that something terrible had occurred. She spoke about the years that followed, about Connor's questions and his struggles, and his gradual development of a mature understanding that his father's death in service to others represented a sacrifice that could be honored through Connor's own choices and development. She emphasized that Connor's answer on Family Feud, his articulation that people honor deceased loved ones by becoming who those loved ones believed they could be, represented years of internal work and reflection by a child who had been forced to grapple with loss and meaning at an age when most children were still largely protected from such profound existential questions. Steve Harvey remained visibly moved throughout these explanations, occasionally wiping his eyes and making no attempt to transition away from the serious emotional terrain the conversation had entered. When the family finished speaking, Steve addressed Connor directly again. He told the boy that his answer had been perfect not just because it corresponded to the #1 response on the survey, but because it demonstrated wisdom and emotional maturity that many adults never achieved, that it showed Connor had taken the tragedy of losing his father and transformed it into a framework for building a meaningful life, and that his father would undoubtedly be extraordinarily proud of the young man Connor was becoming. Steve then addressed the studio audience and the cameras, speaking about the particular sacrifice of families who lose service members and the lifelong impact on children who grow up without fathers or mothers killed in military operations. He emphasized that Connor represented thousands of children across the nation who carried similar losses, who had been shaped by the absence of parents who died serving their country, and who deserved recognition and support not just in the immediate aftermath of loss, but throughout their entire developmental trajectory. Steve announced that his foundation would establish a scholarship fund in Captain David Patterson's name to support Connor's education through college, ensuring that David's sacrifice would directly enable Connor to pursue the educational opportunities David had valued and had wanted for his son. The episode aired 4 weeks after the taping and generated immediate and substantial response. The clip of Connor's answer and Steve's emotional reaction was viewed hundreds of millions of times across digital platforms within days of broadcast. The segment resonated particularly strongly with Gold Star families who recognized Connor's experience as reflecting their own struggles and their own efforts to help their children maintain connection to deceased parents while building healthy lives. Military support organizations shared the clip widely as an illustration of the long-term impact of military loss on families and the particular challenges faced by children who lose parents to combat operations. Connor became an inadvertent spokesperson for Gold Star children, receiving requests for interviews and speaking opportunities that he and his family carefully evaluated to ensure they served constructive purposes rather than exploiting his loss for sensationalist attention. He participated in select forums where his perspective could contribute to education about military family sacrifice and advocacy for improved support systems. He emphasized in these appearances that while he was honored to represent Gold Star children, he was one voice among thousands, and that every child who lost a parent to military service had their own unique story and their own way of processing and integrating that loss into their ongoing development. The scholarship fund, established in David Patterson's name, grew substantially beyond the initial foundation contribution as viewers and supporters made additional donations. The fund structure was designed to support not only Connor's education, but also to provide scholarship assistance to other Gold Star children pursuing higher education, creating a legacy that extended David's sacrifice beyond his immediate family to benefit a broader population of young people affected by military loss. Jennifer worked with the foundation to establish selection criteria that reflected David's values, prioritizing applicants who demonstrated character, commitment to service, and determination to build meaningful lives despite the challenges created by losing a parent. Connor's articulation that honoring deceased loved ones meant becoming the person they believed you could be became a touchstone phrase repeated frequently in Gold Star family communities and in broader conversations about processing grief and finding meaning after significant loss. Therapists working with grieving children and families incorporated Connor's framework into their therapeutic approaches, helping young people who had lost parents develop constructive relationships with their deceased loved ones through choices and growth that would honor their parents' values and hopes. The concept provided a forward-looking orientation to grief work, emphasizing that connection to deceased parents could be maintained through the ongoing process of becoming rather than only through backward-looking remembrance. Jennifer spoke publicly about parenting Connor as a Gold Star widow, describing both the immense challenges and the unexpected strengths that had emerged from navigating loss together. She emphasized that Connor's emotional intelligence and mature perspective had not appeared spontaneously, but had developed through years of therapeutic support, honest conversation, and family commitment to helping him process his grief in healthy ways. She credited her extended family, military support organizations, and professional counselors with providing the resources and framework that had allowed Connor to transform his loss into a foundation for growth, rather than remaining trapped in anger or despair. 5 years after the Family Feud episode, Connor appeared again on Steve Harvey's platform at age 17, now a high school senior preparing to attend college on the scholarship established in his father's name. Steve interviewed him about the intervening years and about how his understanding of his father's sacrifice and his own responsibility to honor it had evolved as he matured. Connor reflected that his answer at age 12 had been sincere and meaningful, but that his comprehension of its full implications had deepened substantially as he moved through adolescence and developed greater capacity for abstract thinking and self-reflection. Connor described how the process of becoming the person his father believed he could be had required him to develop his own identity and values, rather than simply imitating what he understood of his father's character. He explained that honoring his father meant integrating David's values with his own emerging personality and interests, creating something new that reflected both his inheritance from his father and his own individual development. He spoke about choosing to pursue engineering in college partly because of his father's respect for technical skill and problem-solving, but also because of his own genuine interest in the field, about his involvement in community service that reflected his father's commitment to helping others, but that took forms relevant to Connor's own generation and concerns. The 17-year-old Connor demonstrated remarkable insight into the psychology of grief and development, explaining that growing up without his father had shaped him in ways both visible and invisible, that he would never know what person he might have become if his father had lived, but that he had consciously chosen to let his father's values and hopes guide his development in constructive rather than limiting ways. He acknowledged that this was an ongoing process rather than a completed project, that he continued to navigate questions about how to honor his father's memory while also establishing his own independent adult identity, and that he anticipated this negotiation would continue throughout his life. Jennifer spoke about watching Connor mature from the grieving 6-year-old at his father's funeral to the articulate 12-year-old, who had given that perfect answer on Family Feud to the thoughtful 17-year-old preparing to leave home for college. She described the profound bittersweetness of parenting alone through Connor's developmental milestones, celebrating his achievements while grieving that David was not present to witness them, feeling pride in Connor's growth while feeling sorrow that David's sacrifice had been necessary to secure the freedom within which Connor could flourish. She emphasized that the Gold Star family experience involved carrying this duality continuously, holding both gratitude for their child's healthy development and grief for the parent who should have been present to participate in that development. Steve Harvey reflected on the impact of Connor's original appearance and answer, noting that the moment had stayed with him as one of the most powerful in his long career. He described how Connor's articulation that people honor deceased loved ones by becoming who those loved ones believed they could be had reframed his own understanding of grief and legacy, had caused him to think differently about how the living maintain relationships with the deceased, and had inspired him to expand his foundation's work supporting military families beyond immediate crisis response, to include long-term developmental support for Gold Star children. 10 years after the original Family Feud episode, Connor Patterson at age 22 had completed his engineering degree and was beginning his career while also remaining involved in advocacy work for Gold Star families. He participated in a documentary examining the long-term trajectories of children who lost parents to military service, providing perspective on the journey from acute grief to integrated loss across developmental stages. He spoke about how his father's absence continued to shape his experience even as he built an adult life, about the questions that arose without a father's guidance, about the ongoing process of imagining what his father would think or want or advise in various situations, and about the ways that honoring his father's memory had become woven into his identity rather than remaining a separate conscious practice. Connor acknowledged that his journey had been supported by resources many Gold Star children did not access, including therapeutic support, strong extended family involvement, community recognition, and financial resources that enabled educational opportunities. He emphasized the importance of ensuring that all children who lose parents to military service receive comprehensive support across their developmental trajectory, not just in the immediate aftermath of loss, but throughout childhood, adolescence, and into young adulthood as they navigate major life transitions without the parent who should have been present. The documentary concluded with footage of Connor visiting Arlington National Cemetery to place flowers at his father's grave, a ritual he maintained annually on the anniversary of David's death. He spoke to his father as he stood at the grave, updating him on his life, his work, his relationships, and his ongoing efforts to become the person David had believed he could be. The monologue was intimate and revealing, showing how Connor maintained an active psychological relationship with his father despite 15 years of physical absence, how he continued to seek his father's approval and guidance through internal dialogue, and how honoring his father's memory remained central to his sense of purpose and direction. The comprehensive documentation of Connor's journey from grieving 6-year-old to mature adult demonstrated the long arc of processing parental loss due to military service. His answer at age 12 on Family Feud, articulating that people honor deceased loved ones by becoming who those loved ones believed they could be, had not been a temporary insight, but rather a foundational philosophy that continued to guide his development across adolescence and into adulthood. The answer had been perfect not only because it corresponded to the survey response, but because it represented a profound truth Connor had discovered through his own grief work, a truth that would continue to shape his life indefinitely. Steve Harvey's emotional response to Connor's answer, his visible tears and his departure from entertaining persona to engage authentically with a child's grief and wisdom, had created a moment that transcended typical boundaries of game show programming. The willingness to honor the depth of Connor's answer rather than moving quickly past it, to create space for the family to share their story, and to respond with genuine emotion rather than maintaining professional distance, demonstrated the potential for media platforms to facilitate meaningful witness to experiences that deserve recognition and respect. The subsequent scholarship fund, advocacy work, and ongoing support for Connor and other Gold Star children showed how a single perfect answer in an unexpected context could catalyze substantive responses that created lasting benefit. The recognition that thousands of children carry losses similar to Connor's, that each Gold Star child deserves support tailored to their developmental needs across their entire childhood and adolescence, and that society bears collective responsibility for ensuring these children receive resources necessary to build healthy and meaningful lives despite the sacrifice their families made should inform policy and practice. Connor Patterson's perfect answer demonstrated that children who lose parents to military service develop their own wisdom about grief and honor, that their perspectives deserve serious attention rather than dismissal as juvenile or incomplete, and that sometimes the most profound insights about loss and legacy emerge from those who have been forced to grapple with these questions at ages when such contemplation should not be necessary. The answer was perfect in its content, in its timing, in its articulation, and in its revelation of a young person who had transformed tragedy into a framework for growth, honoring his father not through stasis or imitation, but through the ongoing dynamic process of becoming.